Hello and welcome to an acrylic tutorial. I don't do these very often and I'm going to have to apologise. I haven't filmed an acrylic tutorial and the camera is really rather high compared to where I'm used to it being because I'm having to work on an angle because it's acrylic. So if the sound's really crap, I'm going to have to dub this and I'm going to try lowering this a little bit more. Let's see how this goes. I've got a new tripod. As many of you know, I don't like it very much actually. I'll tell you what it is, just in case you want to know. It's a CL-TP2500 from Camlink, which is very, very similar. It was a Camlink one from the TP series I was using before. I don't really know what the difference is between this one and that one, other than the colour is slightly different, but I can't seem to get this one in quite the position on the floor that I used to have it in, so it means it's at this silly high angle, kind of whether I like it or not. I'm gonna just try moving it down a little bit. Okay, I can have it a bit lower, and that's good, but that means I'm sitting in a funny place, so let's get you back where you should be. I'm going to be painting a tree right now, and I'm going to do an insert here on the screen of a painting I did a little while back for a friend of mine where I'd sketched some trees in my acrylic sketchbook. I use a mixed media sketchbook to just sketch in acrylic sometimes because I find it enjoyable. And a friend of mine was like, oh, I really love that. And he just recovered from cancer, so I felt sorry for him and I gave it to him. I cut it out of my sketchbook, something I would never normally do, and I gave it to him as a welcome back to work. You finished chemotherapy and you've got the all clear present, because that's the kind of nice altruistic person that I am, and he is a very, very, very close friend. I tried repeatedly to paint the same painting for him on canvas, and I couldn't get anything like the life or the tone of the original. And the original, as you may have now seen, because I think I've put it up now or I'm about to, is a stand of trees. It's called Stand of Trees 7 because I painted loads of them. And what I'm going to be painting today for you is one tree. So I'm working on canvas board because canvas panel. I don't actually like working on stretched canvases for this kind of technique. I think you need the rigidity. And I haven't really kind of supported it very well here. It's just sort of sitting on my box easel. So it's got a bit of spring to it. It's not rigidly held down at all, actually. I'm not going to put clips around the edges and make it sort of flat. This is a really shit canvas board. It is one that was, it's a 9x14 and it was in a pack of 3 for £9 at full price. That would be about $15, so about a $5 canvas board. I don't think it's the greatest quality. It looks kind of grey. I would normally re-gesso this myself because I think factory dressed gesso is always, without exception, bloody awful. But I'm not going to today because the technique I'm using doesn't actually really matter that much. And I'm going to be using minimal kind of brushy type supplies, but a lot of different paints. And this is one of those things where you don't need to use what I'm using. You can totally improvise the paints and the colours and the brands and everything else and just do your own thing. So I'm going to show you first of all the paints I have got out of my stash and put together, because I may not use all of them. We're going to see how it goes. And some of these are fairly standard colours, some of them are special effect colours or limited edition colours, and some I've got mediums and all sorts of stuff here. So I'll try and just show you the kind of standard stuff first. So we have, these are in the Daler and Rowney System 3 series, which is their kind of good student range slash gifted amateur range, and they're not really intended for professionals. HOOKER'S Green, number 352, that has got a very high permanence rating, and that's a mixture of phthalo green, transparent red iron oxide, and acrylamide yellow GX. So PG7, pigment red 101 transparent, and pigment yellow 73. I have got another green, Pistachio 302, which is, again, high permanence. That is titanium dioxide, acrylamide yellow 10G, and phthalo green. So PW6, PY3, PG7. Now, PY3 is a bit ropey on the permanence, but in this context, I think it'll actually be fine. And remember, a lot of paints that are like PY1, if it was a watercolour, I wouldn't use it. But in acrylic, it's not so bad because the acrylic protects it a little bit from UV and blue light, and that helps. I've got this battered tube of deep violet, which is actually just dioxazine purple, pigment violet 23. Very high permanence there. And these are all soft body acrylics so far. Warm grey 078, which is titanium dioxide, natural iron oxide and Mars black. So PW6, PBR7, PBK11. And I don't know if I'm going to need that or not. I've got a heavy body titanium white, PW6. I have got a silver hue, which is titanium dioxide coated mica and carbon black, so PW6 on mica and PBK7. May or may not use that. I have got a metallic green, which again I may or may not use, and that is a titanium dioxide coated mica and phthalo green, so PW6 PG7. I have got a raw umber, natural iron oxide PBR7. I have a blue called Wedgwood, which is a really pretty periwinkle kind of blue, named after the China manufacturer. Titanium dioxide ultramarine blue yellow iron oxide, so PW6, PB29, PY42. If you don't have that, you could just mix ultramarine, yellow ochre and white, titanium white, and you could get that hue pretty easily. But as I've said, you don't need to use the colours I'm using. You honestly could just use what you have. I'm going to move into professional colours, and if I haven't said, by the way, any colour I've mentioned without saying it's heavy body, they're all soft body. I'm going to just show you some special effects and mediums, and then I'll move on to the pro colours I'm using. And I will mostly be using pro colours in this. So I have a medium, I have an interference shimmering red medium, 713, which is made with a mica that is coated. It doesn't tell me exactly what they use in it, not surprisingly, because it's a special effect one. I have their pearlescent tinting medium, which you can mix with any colour to make it a pearlescent colour, and use sparingly is the only thing I can say. And then I have a matte impasto gel, matte without the E, bad Daler and Rowney, and I'll be using that just to add a little bit of texture. The professional colours I'll be using are light red oxide from CRYLA. CRYLA is Daler and Rowney's Pro range. So I've got light red oxide here, which is a single pigment PR101, which is red iron oxide. I have got yellow green, again, and all the CRYLA ones are heavy body because that's what CRYLA are. That's Arylide yellow, 5GX, titanium white and chromium oxide green. So that's PY74 brackets LF. Not 100% sure what that is. I think it's the light fast version of PY74. And PW6, which is titanium white, and PG17, which is oxide of chromium green. And that has got a light fast rating of 1, which is the best that one can get. And of course it's a professional paint, so that's what you'd expect. I have cerulean blue, which they spell COERULEUM helpfully, and that's just pure cerulean blue, PB35, which is one of the chromium pigments. A lovely, lovely blue. I may not use that at all. Who knows? Don't know where this is going to go yet. That's the joy of acrylic. One I know I'm using is buff titanium, or titanium buff, which is simply titanium white PW6 that hasn't been bleached. Doesn't have a separate pigment code. Cad orange, because you can't mimic that. Probably won't be using that, but that's PO20, cadmium orange. Obviously don't eat paint, that's all I can say. Cinnamon, if you're out there. I said it, don't eat paint. Cadmium yellow, don't eat that either. And that is pure PY35. And my red is PYRROLE red, because I prefer that to Cad red. And that's PR254. There's going to be really, really minimal, if any, colour mixing in this, because we're not going to be mixing colours. It's not that kind of painting. This is very much an impressionist, slap it on kind of painting. So, I'm just going to rearrange my paints because I want them where I can get them, and I may have to stop from time to time to dispense paint onto my palette. I'm using a really sophisticated palette that actually many of you may not have. It's a really actually a pretty elite palette used by some of the most professional and highly sought acrylic painters in the world, actually. And if you see this on Amazon or anywhere else and it's at a discount so that you could actually afford it as mere mortals out there, I really strongly recommend you get this, because in my opinion it's the best palette for acrylic that exists. And it's a plastic plate. I don't think you can get better for acrylic at all. All you do, if you're doing a painting with a toned ground, is paint the underside of the plate with your toned ground colour. So if you're using yellow ochre to tone your ground, you paint it, and then when you dispense your paints and mix your paints, they look the colour they will look on the page, and you can dispense them around the edge and mix them in the middle. And at the end of the day, if you're not painting a la prima, you just mix them all together into sludge with your brush, paint that all over the inside, and the next day what you'll find is, because the toned ground by then will be covered up, you're now painting on a neutral grey that all your colours will look reasonable on next to each other. And it's a really good way to paint better quality, is to use that technique. So if you're unsure about painting in acrylic and you think, actually I need a bit of help, that might help you. I'm going to be using some really high-tech materials, namely some sea sponge, and I've also got an elephant's ear sponge, which is really a watercolour sponge, and I don't know whether I'll even use that one, but definitely using the other ones. Brush wise, I've really got 3 that I'm going to actually be using, and they're all by CRYLA. Never pay full price for brushes if you can help it, they're very expensive. So this one is one of my favourite brushes. It's a size 14 broad, which is a bit like a bright, but it's got a thick end to it, and these are a synthetic. CRYLA brushes are synthetic, they're very stiff, they're designed to work with the heavy body of CRYLA paint. I have got a flat glaze, a 1/2 inch flat glaze, which is much, let's get you some focus on that, can't get focus on that, sorry, much thinner, stiffer brush, because it's intended to apply very thin coats of glaze. And I have a size 4 fan blender, which we'll also be using to blend out some edges. That is predominantly all you're going to need brush-wise. I don't think you need anything else, really. I might throw some others in, but, you know, let's see how it goes. And I've got a number 2 and a number 17 cheap palette knife. This is a 17, this is a 2. I like these ones, they're useful. We're going to actually paint with the knives. So there's going to be an element of Leonid Afremov style painting in elements of this. Not much, mostly this is more impressionist than that, but then there'll be a little bit of palette knife painting. What this is going to be is a tree that's going to fill up a large area, and it's going to have a very fine trunk, and then there's going to be some ground and some background. So the first thing we're going to do is paint in that background, and what I'm going to paint in is just titanium buff first of all, and then what we're going to do is add in the tiniest specks of colour and sponge them to give it some texture, and then we're going to add the shadow of the tree and then build the tree on the top. And at that point I'm going to apply some impasto medium so that we can add a thickness, so the tree can stand not proud, but just have a little bit more texture to it than it ordinarily would. Just in case any of you are wondering about my unusual garment, it looks like I'm wearing lycra. That's because I am. I wear, because my joints spontaneously dislocate, I wear an exoskeleton 24/7, comprised of skin compression clothing, which is recovery clothing rather than sport clothing, and that helps with muscle spasms and helps keep my joints stable. And because I've taken my shirt off, because I don't like to paint acrylic with a baggy sleeved cotton shirt that's going to drag through the paint, you can see what I wear underneath. The only thing I've got with me is a jar of water and a mister, just in case I need it. So let's get started with some of that titanium buff. I'm going to put it straight onto the plate because I'm probably going to use it quite a few times. Some of these colours won't go onto the plate, they'll stay in the tube, and I'll stick the brush in the end of the tube because we won't need very much of them. And that's the kind of amount I've started with. I know I'm going to need a lot more than that, but I just find it easier to control. And I've wet my brush, just dipped it in water, and I'm just painting to make a soft paste. I'm not diluting that paint very much. A tip, if you ever do want to dilute your paint a lot, use airbrush medium instead of water, because that will allow you to dilute it lots and lots. I'm painting from the middle outwards. Now the middle's not going to show because the middle is going to be painted over 100%. And this is just a background. It's just to add a warm background. I'm going to give it brush strokes around the edges because I actually want it to have a kind of painterly edge, as people say. I don't like that word. Don't think it is a real word, but I'm going to do that. Oh, I have the brush in my mouth, sorry. I rely on my mouth as a third hand. And if you could see the state of my studio and all the stuff I had to move to paint acrylic because I needed more space for bloody tubes. Because that's the problem painting acrylic, you have to have all the tubes out because you can't have a little palette where you dispense things because you have to have it all out because you can't dry it down. You have to paint wet. And you tend to buy, if you paint it a lot, you buy big tubes or big tubs. And actually I waste a lot of money on acrylic because if I was half decent, I would buy big tubs because they'd save me money. And the reason I don't is I don't have the space to buy big tubs of paint. I do not have the storage for them. I've got a real storage issue at the moment. I'm limited on what I can buy. So you can see right now I'm kind of getting towards the edges and I'm just trying to make sure I get a pretty painterly edge, as they say. I want it to have brush strokes, but I want it to be fairly soft. I don't want hard lines too much, so I'm brushing over those brush strokes. They're almost fake brush strokes. There's not a lot of paint on the brush. I'm really taking paint off the brush and maybe moving it around a little bit, but I'm not kind of putting a lot of paint on the edges, and I won't be adding any more paint to this brush now. Just be putting it around the edges. And now I'm going to smooth that middle area right out. So I don't know if you can see that very well. I'll pick it up so that you can. Sorry, it's lit from above, you see, so you can just about make it out. You can see I've just painted that buff area. It's almost hard to see because all it does is adds a little bit of warmth and tone. And I'm just going to squeeze out the brush onto the edges of the palette and let that dry down. So I put some paint on the palette so that as that dries, it'll give me a surface if I need to mix. And I'm going to put that brush straight into water because you always should put your brush straight into water. If you don't have an enormous brush like this, don't worry, you could use a 1-inch flat. Anything from the Simply Gold Taklon range from Daler and Rowney I think are perfectly good. So brushes like this one. The only way you can get that one is in a pack of about 10 brushes for about £7, $10. So you're paying equivalent of $1, 50 pence for that brush. It's a brilliant brush. I've had it years. I think those packs are brilliant. I'm actually going to be reviewing the watercolour equivalent to it a little bit later now in another video. Now what you need to remember is with watercolour your brushes are pretty important. You've got to have reasonably good quality really, to be really honest with you. Acrylic, you can use any old shit, to be honest with you. Beware, some of them will shed fur, but really it doesn't matter. A cheap acrylic brush will do you just as good. I think with acrylic it's much more about your personal technique and how you use the brush, whereas with watercolour you need a good brush to start with. So that's my advice. Now what I'm going to be doing now is I'm going to add some colour to this because it's a little bit plain, and I want to bring in some of those colours that are going to make up the foreground of the painting so that we can just kind of pull it all together a little bit. So I'm going to be putting a few colours on my palette, and I'm putting them onto that area that has got the wet titanium buff on it so that they kind of get a bit muddy because they're background colours. I don't want them to stand proud. I don't want them to stand out. I want them to kind of merge away into nothing. So I'm putting out some pistachio, that lovely green, some silver hue. I'm going to put out some metallic green that I doubt I will actually use, just a dot of it. I'm going to put out some of that interference pearl, because that's rather important. I can find it, the pearlescent tint medium. Pearlescent medium is a lovely thing to use in backgrounds, particularly if you like mixed media. You can find it's a really useful thing just to add a little bit of interest without adding any colour. So it will just go on top of that and it won't add a different colour, it'll just add a little bit of tone. And I've got my foreground colours kind of ready, so I've got a bit of that yellow green. I'm not adding hookers, not adding any of the dark colours, keeping to just the light ones, and I'm going to pop in some of that Wedgwood blue. So I've got 3 greens, pistachio, yellow green and metallic green, and I've got silver, I've got pearlescent tinting medium, a drop of Wedgwood blue, and that is all. And that is what I'm going to be using to just blend in. Now I could blend them in with a sponge, but I'm going to be using a fan blender. And I'm going to take that pearlescent medium first just to show you what it looks like. It's like sparkly white. And I'm just going to brush that on. And I'm going to focus that brushing on around the edges of this painting, because that's the bits that are going to show. The middle is not going to show because it's going to be all covered up. And I'm brushing it on with a fan blender, because if I brush it really hard and I'm staying inside the titanium buff, I'm not going into the white space around it, I can kind of make it disappear. I can make it so that it's not there and it's just mixed in. It won't sit like a white cake on the surface. It'll just blend away into nothing. And that's what a fan blender is for. It's not for making waterfalls or grass. It's really intended for getting a really soft blend. And you can't really see how that looks, but what I've done is I've created an iridescent film. You can see it there, that iridescent sparkly film. It's not perfect, it doesn't cover every area, but that wasn't my intention. Now I'm going to take some of that yellow green, which is a heavy body acrylic, and I'm going to dot it, just a few dots around the edge, and I'm going to do the same with the pistachio. And you'll all be thinking, what the hell is he doing? And a bit of Wedgwood, and I'm mixing them together. It doesn't really matter. And a bit of silver. Why not? I'm mixing the silver with the Wedgwood, so it's not kind of on its own. And the metallic green, I'm just running the brush through, mixing it into the yellow green and the... So I've mixed the metallic green, the yellow green, and the pistachio together very roughly to give a kind of gungy sludge. And I'm just brushing that on, and I'm just basically stamping almost. I'm just putting it on, and while it's wet, brush straight into water so the brush is safe. I'm going to take a wet sponge, and I'm going to sponge those paints in. And first thing that happened is a load of water pissed out the sponge and ran down the page, and that's not a problem at all. What I want to do is get it blended all over, middle edge the lot in a very rough way, and that was with a wet sponge. So I've left a little bit of titanium buff showing, not an awful lot, and there's some areas where the blue is still showing, again not an awful lot, and all over this is an iridescence. Put the sponge into water, take a dry sponge, and now I'm going to lift a lot of that moisture off by stippling bottom to top. And you'll see what will happen is you'll create a lot of bubbles and a lot of roughness, and those bubbles will dry into a rough coating. And you might think, oh dear, but that's going to make the paint flake off. Well, it's not, because we're going to flatten it in the areas that matter. Okay, once we've achieved that, we then take the areas that matter, which will be this middle area, and we draw with the sponge our tree by wiping out an area. So I've wiped out a bit of ground, an area where the trunk will probably be, and an area where the tree will probably be, to make sure we have a flat surface for those. All those other areas I'm doing a little twist now to break the bubbles and just give myself a little bit of texture when it dries. So the idea is we get a texturized area outside the tree, but the actual tree stays flat, and there won't be a harsh line because we'll paint over it. So what we now have is a kind of green, slightly iridescent, slightly sparkly area, and we're going to have to now let that dry. So I'm going to be pausing you and coming back later when that's dry. Right, I'm back now. I've let this dry, and I've decided to move the camera to an angle where I can better film what I'm doing, because I was painting before in this first half with the canvas at quite a high angle. I'm not overjoyed with this particular position actually either, and I'm going to see, and this could go horribly wrong, if I can lower you a little bit and get you even nearer to the action. Let's see how that goes. Yeah, I think that might work. I'm getting used to this new tripod, which is not that dissimilar to the last one. It's a bit smoother mechanism. Okay, right. What we're going to do is create a tree using sponge so that we've got a lovely soft way to do this. And these sea sponge are lovely. All that texture that we can use, and you can twist them and shape them. So I need to make sure they're pretty dry, because wet sponge does not work. And then this one has got flat edges and the lovely natural edge, and that gives us a lot of control, a lot of ability to change it. So the way to dry these, if you ever need to dry them, is just to wrap them in a cloth and squeeze it, and the cloth will soak out the water from the sponge and we'll leave it completely dry. So I've got those there. And I have a sea silk as well that I'm probably not going to need to use. And what I'm going to do is put some paint ready. And this is the palette that I was working with before. The greens have all mixed together, and you can see that lovely metallic sheen that's now spread through all the colours. I've got the silver Wedgwood combination and the little specks of what's left. And actually, if you look at the tones, they're very similar, so you can see what I mean about if you were using a toned ground, painting the plate, or merging the colours together. Because actually, think about what I said earlier on about how if you, the next day, just mix all the colours together, let them dry overnight, and use it the next day as a palette. These are the individual colours I'm using, and this is all the colours kind of merged together. And you can see actually, together, it's easy to see the tonality. So that's why it works, in short. What I'm going to start with is some light and some shadow. So I'm going to use some warm grey. If you don't have warm grey, you could just mix titanium dioxide, a titanium white, with something like a burnt sienna or a Venetian red, something like that. Any kind of PBR7 kind of colour, and a little bit of black, Mars black ideally. And that'll give you this fairly sludgy warm grey, which I really like. I think it's a nice grey. And I want to add a little tiny bit of interest to it, not too much. So I'm going to add some silver hue, which is titanium coated mica and carbon black. And it's a really lovely, lovely colour to work with. I could use just the interference medium that I've mentioned before and mix that in, but I don't want the effect of that. I want the effect of the silver. And I'm not actually going to mix these together. I'm just kind of folding them together and spreading it out. So I've got an uneven layer here, and if you can see it really, but you can see the silver streaks in a grey background, because that's actually what I want. What I want here... Oh, sorry, I'm just reaching for a paper towel. I'm failing completely. I wanted a paper towel to wipe my palette knife with. I've overreached a little bit there. What I want is just to have that little effect of the two together. And I'm actually going to add a little bit of white as well, because that's a little bit darker than I want. So just a bit of titanium white. And the titanium white's a heavy body, so it's easier to dispense because you can just sort of squirt it out and splat it, and it will stay where you put it. And we're going to do this section using a sponge. So what I'm going to do is start off with some white, because it's always easier to start with white. And these trees are going to be light at the top left, dark at the bottom right. So I'm going to sponge in some white there. Starting far apart and getting closer together. So can you see I started sparse and I moved, so there's more white here and less white here. Now I'm going to move to that silver grey mix, and I'm going to do exactly the same, but starting slightly further inside. So by starting slightly further inside, I've kind of moved a step inwards. And now I'm going to, on the lower right edge of the tree, I'm going to put a lot more grey. We won't see most of this. It will be painted over with layers of colour. but it will give just a little hint of shadow in between where we see this in between the colours, I suppose. So I'm going to put it on, and I've just smeared the rest of the paint around on the palette because I think it helps. Because we're sponging, it's actually kind of nice if the other colours pick up a little bit of this. And just to make it look a little bit more tree-shaped, I'm just popping some in here as a guide for myself. That's not going to show at all, but that's just there as a guide. And I'm not going to wash the sponge out just yet. It's relatively easy to get these clean if you wet them and just give them a little squeeze so that you get most of the acrylic monomer out of them. You won't get rid of all of it, but getting rid of most of it makes them reasonably easy to get clean again afterwards. Well, I find anyway. So we'll pop that, oops, sorry, just nudged you, pop that to one side. I know this is not the best camera angle to really appreciate it, but I will lift and show it you at intervals. So what we've got is white, and then we've got the grey, loose in some areas, dense in the bottom right, so it gets darker, but we've only got the white in the top right where the light's hitting it. And what that's meant to be, in my head anyway, is the leaves at the back of the tree that have just picked up that white. Now what we're going to do is start layering on colour, and I want that to dry a little bit. So I'm going to add the ground, the soil, and we're going to kind of build up from the soil into the painting. So for the soil, I'm going to use burnt umber because it's a nice straightforward raw umber. I'm going to use raw umber because it's a nice straightforward raw umber, and that is a PBR7 natural iron oxide. I'm going to pop some of that on my plate, and this is a bit separated in the tube, this one, so some of the binder has separated out, but you don't need to ever worry when that happens because you can just mix it in. So to show you here, it looks like it's swimming in a pool of oil. That's absolutely fine when that happens with acrylic. Just fold it in, give it a little mix with your palette knife, and you won't know. So it's a very smooth body acrylic, it's quite soft, so I've just spread it out, and what I'm going to do is start applying it at the base of the painting. And I don't know if I can get this so you can see it, but let's have a go. Okay, at the base of the green area, not the white below it, I'm just going to dab on, and you can do this with your fingers if you really want to, but I'm going to use a palette knife for now, and I'm trying to use the kind of base of the knife there rather than the tip to just give the impression of a soil line, and I want it reasonably textured. I'm not worrying about the paper, the canvas moving around, because it doesn't matter. We're not doing precision art here, we're doing a loose impressionist style. So I want to bring that out to the edge, and the important thing is to keep the upper edge as straight as you can. The lower edge being wonky is kind of what we want. So here I'm going to fill in by dragging paint up and make that upper edge a little bit tidier and a little bit smoother. And the top edge doesn't have to be dead smooth because it's ground. It's meant to be soil. It's meant to be a little bit messy. And I'm kind of going over this, and I'm stamping up and down with my palette knife because that gives texture, and when it dries it'll shrink back, but I want to keep that little texture. And I'm now going to add in some effects because I don't think that's quite interesting enough, and I don't want the ground to be boring, I suppose. I'm going to add a tiny bit of a red interference medium into, so this is Shimmering Red 713 interference medium, and what that looks like, I'll just put some out. I've got to work reasonably fast before this dries, and this is entirely optional. You know, if you're doing this and you don't have interference media, you don't need it. It's just what I want to do because this is a gift. It's a clear base with a white, with a red coated mica inside it, and I'm going to mix a little of that into some of the remaining raw umber, not a lot, just a little, because I don't want it to be bright red. And I'm going to just touch in just a few places, just touch that mixture across the paint. I'm going to take off a little bit of paint there because it's a little bit heavy, mix it into that medium and just tamp it along. And it'll look terribly white to begin with, but once it dries into it, we'll only actually see it if the paper's at the right angle. So don't worry too much. Interference medium can be very powerful, and actually you really need to practice using it to know how much you can get away with. And on a dark surface like that, we won't see it much, but once the paint dries, it'll become really intense. Now the nice thing about using a daylight bulb as I do to paint, which is just, I'll show you, it's just there. I have a daylight bulb, and that's a filament daylight bulb, not one of those silly energy saving nonsense bulbs. Filament bulbs have their purposes, and this is one of them. The heat coming off that dries the paint reasonably fast, and I don't like to use a heat gun or a hairdryer or acrylic. I really don't think it gives you the same finish. It can end up drying almost too fast and you lose some texture, or you can get bubbles, and bubbles are absolutely terrible. I'm now going to add an impasto medium on the tree because I want a bit of hidden texture. Now this is a matte impasto gel by DNR, and I broke the lid last time I used it, so it's probably all gone hard. Oh no, we're okay. I had to squeeze out rather more than I needed, but we're okay. So there we have, big lump of it, and I am very simply going to take small amounts and I'm going to dot them very gently. And don't worry about these looking rather like sore thumbs, because we're going to get a sponge in a moment and merge it in. So you need to stick to the kind of dense central ring of the tree, because the outside with the sort of sponged fluffy edges, we don't want to kind of bugger up by putting impasto gel onto that. We only want it on those areas. And I may even add, I mean, I could have mixed it in with the soil and made the soil a little bit more substantial, but I didn't. So there we are. I'm taking my sponge again and I'm going to tamp over that area to soften and to merge in that impasto gel. And the purpose of that is that that impasto gel is going to dry down and it's going to give us a lovely texture, so that when the paint goes on, it'll have a little bit in the light of shadow and a bit less flatness, because whilst we've got the impressionist fluffy edge, the interior is just going to look awfully solid, and once it's got lots of colours on, that'll be better. But let's just show it you. So we've got the interference colour is in here. When it dries, it won't have that whiteness to it, that'll go away, and we can paint over it. And then these little touches are going to dry down, and you can see them very clearly here, but they will dry colourless, so that's okay. And we've still got the white and the fluffy edge. And the way to think of this tree is that the tree itself, the foreground of the tree is kind of a circle, like a hornbeam, I guess. And this bit at the back is just sort of stuff behind it, or the shadow of the tree. And this bit up here is where the light's just catching it. And we'll draw in the trunk later. The trunk will just paint in when we get to the end and see what colours we've actually used. So I'm going to pop some colours out onto my palette now, and I'm going to have a little dig because I don't know where I put half of them. So I'm going to pop out some cadmium yellow, which is 612, the CRYLA Professional Cad Yellow. And that's a real Cad Yellow, because I think if you're going to use it, use the real thing. I don't think Cad Yellow hues are very good in acrylics, to be very honest with you. And I'm going to pop out a little bit of Cad Orange, not too much of these colours, because they're very, very vibrant. And I don't actually want them to show up. I actually want these to disappear into the background, because they're going to be used with dozens of other colours. I am going to use some violet, but the violet is for shadow. I think DIOXAZINE purple is the most wonderful shadow colour, and people don't really realise that. some of that Wedgwood blue. I've shown you all the colours at the start, so I don't need to show you every tube. I think that would be rather silly. Let's go for some realism now. Some HOOKER'S green, which is phthalo green, transparent red oxide, and arylamide yellow GX3. We're going to need a little more of that. This tree is not going to be very green. I don't like doing green trees in this technique. I like a bit of abstraction. Some of the yellow green. The nice thing with the CRYLAs is they tell you on the front of the tube if they're a mixture or whether they're single pigment, and I think that's nice when one is buying them to know that. A little bit of cerulean blue, simply because it's useful. And the way I'm laying out these colours, as I'll show you in a moment, is I'm putting them together, so the yellow and the orange are together, the blues are together, the greens are together, because I'm going to mix them on the sponge when I actually use them, and I want to know, as I mix them, what have I actually got. So I'm going to pop out some light red oxide, which is a gorgeous, gorgeous colour. Really goes a long way, but it's really nice and lovely warm brown. It's like a burnt sienna, but I don't know, it's a special burnt sienna. And I'm going to pop out some special effects in a moment, but I want my here it is, I want my PYRROLE red as well, because that's a lovely colour. And the nice thing again with the CRYLAs is because they're heavy body, they say where they are on the palette, they don't slide about, they don't get in one's way. They're very good colours. I'm not going to put in any purple yet. I think I'll put in some silver because I think I might want to use some. I'm going to keep that separate from all the rest because I don't know if or when I want to use silver. And I think I'll just check what other specials I bought down. There was the iridescent medium, which I think I will use now. Anything we put into the background, of course, we can safely use because they will just look like they're meant to be. So that's nice. Oh, I might have some of that pistachio, that other kind of yellow-green, because we use that pretty extensively in the background. And I think we need that, and we might need a little bit of titanium buff as well, because that was a major component of the background. And it'll just draw things together, because what we don't want is any of the foreground to look odd. Now, I apologise for the fact that there's been periods of this video where I've just sort of talked for 10 minutes and not done anything. These are when I've been putting the paints onto the palette, and that does kind of show you that with acrylic, it's not got the spontaneity that one has with watercolour, because we have to put the paints out. And this is why I honestly don't do it very much anymore, because I'm very busy. I don't have the time to spend doing it. If I was doing this in watercolour, I could do it in 20 minutes. You know, equivalent technique. But this is slow, it's hard work. Okay, and I've got some white, because I think I need some. And I've avoided any more warm grey, so I'll just show you what I've got. So I've got pistachio, yellow green, HOOKER'S green, PYRROLE red, light red oxide, Wedgwood, cerulean, CAD orange, which is far more orange in real life than the camera ever shows, CAD yellow, and then I've got the pearlescent tinting medium, silver, metallic green, I've got some white, some titanium buff, the rest of that impasto gel, and I haven't put out any metallic red interference medium because I don't want to put any red in the tree apart from the red that's going to stand out. Now the trick with this technique of building a tree is first of all a bit of distance. So I'm now standing up, my head's up here, I'm standing about, I don't know, the tree's at waist height, so this is waist height, so the tree's there. It's a slight angle so I can see it, and I'm going to start building colour. And the trick is I want to get the whole thing coloured, and it is going to have mostly, I think mostly green. I'm always tempted to add a background tree on either side, but I don't want to do that. So it is going to be mostly green, I think, just with some additions. And I'm going to start with HOOKER'S green, that lovely dark green, and I'm going to start in the middle, just stippling it on. And it'll look awfully flat to begin with. But you need the distance, you see, because when one paints acrylic, one has to remember you don't look at acrylics close up when you have them on one's wall. I'm trying to keep the lighter colours largely to this top corner, but I've got to put some on the other side or it won't balance. So now I'm putting pistachio and yellow green mostly in the top left quadrant. I'm painting it in quadrants at the moment just because that's a good way to begin, and then I'm adding in some hookers because we need to have that. I'm sorry my arm's in the way, there's no other way to film this sort of technique. And then I'm joining it up, and I'm leaving those feathered grey edges because I like them. And then this bottom area, it's not going to be as dark as this side, but it's going to be fairly dark. And the sponging can sometimes matte it all together. The sponging can sometimes leave it rather vibrant. So now I've accidentally put in a little bit of red. That's kind of good because I can now start to introduce a little bit of red, and it won't go, you know, red and green are complements. It'll stand out. It won't go muddy. It'll look like it's meant to be there. Are they flowers on the tree? Are they just red specks? Who knows? Who cares? Just adding in a little bit of the red iron oxide as well, just a little bit of it. And I'm going to add some more of that into the stem and the base of the tree. So having a little bit in the tree will really help us. Now going to add some of that Wedgwood blue, a little more of that than with the red, as it's so pale it really doesn't mean anything. When it mixes with the red you get a nice lavender. The cerulean I'm going to treat much like the red. I'm just going to dot it as I don't want too much of it. The orange is a difficult one. The temptation is to push it where the sun's hitting the tree, but actually I almost want to hold back and just have, you know, the odd speck. And what we will do is we will blend these colours in a little bit more a bit later. And what I did when I did Standard Trees 7 was I actually had a row of trees and each one had a different dominant colour. This one's dominant green, but each one had all the colours. So there'll be a similar painting that would have a yellow tree with flecks of green in it, and that was absolutely fine. I'm now taking just a touch of that metallic green and I'm blending that in. Metallic green is very, very, very bright. So I just want to kind of hide it away. Tamp it down. And I'm getting some mud forming here, and that's okay. Mud is not a bad thing. All we have to do is enliven it. And to enliven it and bring it back, we just add some individual colour. We don't have to get rid of it and go over the mud. All we have to do is add in flecks of colour that will sit on the surface of that mud. And sometimes that means changing the sponge or using the sponge upside down so that we don't add mud immediately on top of the paint we're adding. Little flecks of blue in there. As long as it's recognisable colour, it'll stand proud of that mud. I'm going to add some white now. White only really goes top of the picture. We don't need white anywhere else. Top of the picture and a little bit just down at the bottom. Dot it around, and the good thing with this, if you really find you hate the colours that are forming, you can just put white over the whole thing and just build up more layers if you want. Now I'm going to move to my finger because that's a better tool to just add a little bit of silver paint and a little bit of matte pearlescent medium around the top, and I'm adding in some more of those colours that we may have lost. We might need to add some more colours, and this is going to have to dry, and it's going to have to be kind of rebuilt a little bit to add back in some of those colours. But this is not a finished product, this is a part way through painting. So what I now want to do, and I've got terrible acrylic hands, that's one thing I really hate with acrylic, is you can't bloody touch anything. So let's have a look. We've got what looks like a load of mud with some flecks of colour and some metallics and some sheen and some texture. and I'd like to add some texture to these background areas, and I think I'll do that with a rubber stamp. Maybe when I get to the end I might possibly add some scroll work or some script or something like that. But I want to let this dry down now, and that's going to need overnight because I want it to... The way acrylic dries, for those who perhaps don't know, is acrylic dries, which takes under an hour, and then it cures, and the curing takes 2 to 3 days. And at that point it's rock hard and you can do all sorts of stuff with it, especially if you use clever mediums. I want this to really dry properly, so I want it to dry for a day, and then I'll be happy with it. But I want to paint in the trunk of that tree first of all, and I'm going to use a brush to do that. So I'm just going to see if I can... Yeah, I think I can rest that safely there. While I get my colours together, I'm going to use raw umber again, and I'm going to build into this raw umber some of that pearlescent tinting medium, so that the stem of the tree... I'm going to use 2 blobs of the colour actually. So the stem of the tree has got some pearl, and then we'll go over it once it's dry, perhaps with some silver to add highlights and specks of light. And I'm going to add to my palette a little bit of that dioxazine violet, which is sold as deep violet, but it's dioxazine violet, because that's a nice shadow colour, and we might want a bit of shadow at this stage in the proceedings. Now, I'm going to take my palette knife and take some of that tinting medium and mix it into one of the blobs, and I'm going to mix it in really well this time. Unlike last time, where I just kind of threw some colours together when I was mixing, this time I'm mixing them in good and proper. So I've got now, this has got tinting medium in it, it's pearlescent, this one's not. And I love those mediums from Daler and Rowney. They're really economical for what they are. They last a long time, and they go a pretty long way, I have to say. I'm really pleased with them. I use them a lot in my acrylic work. And, you know, this has got mediums in the background to give it a little bit of sparkle, but the stem of the tree will be very sparkly, and then we'll knock it down, so we'll overpaint it to take some of that sparkle away. So I'm using a flat glaze brush which has got a pretty stiff tip, and it's a 1/2 inch, and I've just wetted the outside. I haven't dipped it right to the bottom so that it splays the bristles. I've just dipped it, and that's the beauty of this brush, is you can get it a little bit wet but not too wet. So I'm looking for where the middle is of this page, and what I tend to look at is where the bar at the top of the easel is when I've got it completely lined up with the easel, and I take the middle of that, and we will have to work to... I tend to paint in very short strokes when I do this because it avoids deviation. We will have to work to blend it in at the top and the bottom. And the fact that it's burnt, raw umber, and thus exactly the same as the ground, will make it look a bit out of place. But it's got a pearlescent tinge to it. It's going to look lovely when it's dry. And raw umber, by the way, if you use an acrylic, raw umber is a wonderful colour because you can mix it into, if you make a mix white with red, you get pink. Add a little bit of raw umber to it, and you get a wonderful pearlescent pink. It won't have a pearlescent sheen, but it will look like pearl. It gives you a lovely soft kind of greyishness to it. So do try that. It doesn't work with watercolour. It only works with acrylic. A little bit of raw umber when you're making a tint, and it will give you a really lovely colour. Now, the whole point of Standard Trees 7 was that the trees were standing on needle-fine stalks that could not possibly support those trees. I want the same kind of effect. I want a needle-fine stalk. I've widened it a little bit just to make it easier to deal with, really, and I'm going to add a little bit of normal raw umber that hasn't had any pearl added to it, just around the base and up the right hand side to add shade. I'm not cleaning my brush at all when I'm doing any of this. I'm just wiping it on the edge of the palette, as I don't want to introduce water. A little bit of silver dotted just where it joins the tree, and I'm using really minimal amounts of it because it, you know, sparkly colour goes a long way. Right. Sometimes you need, when you paint with acrylic, to step back, but what I'm going to do first is I'm adding a little bit of that remaining red interference. I've got a little bit of it, and I'm adding it to the soil and around the base of the tree so that it kind of blends into the soil a bit more properly. You can't see any of that because you're focused a bit higher up, but I'll pick it up and show it to you so you can see what I've done. It's really quite obvious. This area where I've got the silver, I want to blend a little bit, so I'm taking the umber with the tint, with the pearl, and I'm just mixing it into it. And then I'm going to paint down, and what that'll do is it'll give me some streaks, and that's kind of what I want. I want the silver to just be an echo, a little just hint of colour, a sparkle, just a kind of a hint of sparkle. And where I'm going to bring them together, I'm just going to kind of take the tree up, take the trunk of the tree. I forgot my English, I'm terribly sorry. I've just been, I have a very, I suppose he is actually a very dear friend these days. I play World of Warcraft for my sins, and about 5 years ago I met another player who's in the Netherlands, who's become a very good friend over the years, and we chat most evenings. I've just been speaking to him on Skype, and I do speak fairly fluent Dutch, so I've just been speaking to him in written Dutch on Skype. We don't speak, we type speak. And I've just been thinking in Dutch for the last few hours, and I just could not remember my English for this part of a tree. So, oops. I just want to merge it in there. And, you know, you could add branches up if you really wanted to. I don't want to. What I will do when this is all dried down is I will sponge that over and merge it into the tree just a little bit more properly. I'm just looking at what I've got on my palette because I don't want to introduce anything new, and I've got a little bit of white here. So we'll add a little bit of white round here, as there should be some white in there. And a little bit of impasto gel dotted up the trunk because I want the trunk to have a little bit of texture. Unlike Standard Trees 7, I actually want this to not be a needle fine trunk. I want it to have a little texture, so I'll be popping in some impasto medium, and even when it's wet you can actually paint over it. So again, using that pearlescent medium, I'm just going to drag the brush gently over it, and it will spread, it will make a bit of a mess, and when it dries it will remain thick. But it will keep its sheen, it will keep its pearlescence, but it will give it a little bit of viscosity, so that when it dries we get some structure. That's the word I'm looking for, structure. I want to add some shadow now and some shading, so I'm just kind of cleaning off that brush by tamping it onto areas of the palette that haven't got crap all over them already, just to remove most of the brown. But I don't actually want to be completely brown free, I just want a fairly clean brush, and I'm picking up some of that powerful dioxazine violet, and I'm going to add that to the soil on the dark side of the tree, using the tip of the brush to just tamp it on, noting we've got that red interference medium there too. This won't look out of place. I'm just bringing it through into the light side in smaller amounts, because that's the trick to things not looking out of place. If you want a shadow colour, you put it on the light side as well, And then of course I'm going to need some in the tree, so I'm just going to add with the side of the brush, or the tip of the brush. I don't really know what the right word is for it, I've forgotten it again, but again, just a little bit up there and then a fair bit here, because then what happens is one associates, when looking at it, that colour with the dark side and the shadow side, and then it makes sense to one's eyes when one is looking at this painting and thinking, oh, trees aren't that colour. What one will think is, oh, well that must be dark, because the areas one would think of are dark are the areas that have got the shadow colour on them. And incidentally, if you ever mix, I'm just doing it just to show you, dioxazine violet with titanium buff, you can get a really, really cool kind of plaster, sort of, you know, that pinky grey that you get that's like a plaster wall or a drywall in the USA. You can get that really easily with dioxazine violet and titanium buff. It's a nice mixture, and titanium buff is a nice thing to substitute for white if you want your painting to have a bit of earth to it. Now that looks quite extreme because there is a lot of purple on there, and actually there's too much purple on there. But I'm not worried about that, because I can take my brush with a bit of metallic green and a few other colours, a little bit of medium, and I can just dot it on, because remember, this is an underlayer. This is not the final look of the painting. And I've got some white, and white is the antidote to purple in this painting, because purple is shadow and white is light, so I can tamp over it with white and I can get rid of it. So the nice thing with this particular technique is that we can actually just get rid of things. And had I got more green, I would add more green at this stage, but I don't actually want to. What I want to do, I'm just washing out my brush. You don't spend this much on brushes and not take care of them. I'm going to leave that in the water for a few minutes. This is going to dry, and tomorrow what we will do is tamp on more paint to add an upper layer, and this will sit underneath as the shadow, and this will sit underneath as the light. Now, I want to show you the base of the tree, because you need to see. So we've got the soil with a little bit of purple in it, and then over on this side we've got more obvious purple. The red pearlescent, the red iridescence is there, and the pearlescence of the trunk. So where I joined them together, I just mixed in all the colours, and the same at this end, and it will look rather very nice. I do think the outside is a little bare, even though the outside actually has little flashes and little specks of all the colours we're using. They're just so bloody insipid, you can't see them. So I'm not sure at the moment. I'm thinking, do I want to add more paint? Do I want to add some script stamping? And I think I may need to sleep on that, because the glitch we have about script stamping is this doesn't go right to the edges. It was intended to be a sort of like it was within a frame almost, but actually I did go quite close to the edge here. I've just spilt some paint here. I think I could probably quite safely paint to the edges, and I've just spotted, I've clearly just sprayed brown paint everywhere, because I've got some brown paint where I don't want it there. So I must have just caught something, and that's why. And I've got some brown paint here, so I may now have to do a little rescue operation. It's dried already as well, but I can add to that, that's okay. There's not a problem that that's happened. You can't see it, but I'm just going to rescue it before I show it to you, because I'm just using my finger to apply just a little bit of brown paint, and I'm just adding a bit more on the other side to make sure it balances. Okay, that's now fine. So all I did was, there was a spatter of brown paint up here, and I'm just adding with my finger enough brown to cover it, and over here the same. I'm just using my finger as well to just smudge in that purple. Easier done with a finger than with a brush, I think, and that'll sort it out. The trunk of the tree I'm largely going to leave alone, because that's got impasto gel mixed in with it, and I don't want to smear that because I want it to dry lumpy. I want it to dry kind of awkward. Now, I could, in theory, if I really wanted to, put the same colours on the edge that I put elsewhere and kind of try and merge it together. But, you know, I don't want to do that because I'm going to end up with this ugly looking frame around the edge of the painting in the background. So I think I am going to do some stamping over it with a script stamp. And the good thing with that is it doesn't have to look perfect. It can be messy. I think what I could do is put in some I've got some scroll stamps, so I could put some scrolls in the top corners, some sort of filigree curly things. I could stencil onto it if I wanted to add some more texture, and then just do a little bit of script stamping just in a few places. Who knows, I might even add layers of something. I don't know yet, I haven't got that far. But this is one of the lovely things with this type of acrylic painting. If you're doing a kind of an impressionist, very textured painting, as I am, with lots of colours. I mean, looking there, we've got metallic green next to red, all sorts of colours. And once that's dried and we can add another layer, the fascination of Standard Trees 7, I think for me and both for Rob when I gifted it to him, were there's so many wonderful colours in it, and every time you look at the trees you see the differences. You start seeing other colours that you haven't noticed yet. And that was a really nice thing for both of us, both when I painted it and when I gave it to him. So I want this to have that same fascination, and I didn't paint that in one session. That was painted, dried, painted, dried, painted, dried, to build layers and to give texture. But the great thing with that texturized type of painting is it lends itself really well to turning it into a mixed media piece. So if anything goes wrong, you can stick paper in with Mod Podge, you can stamp all over it, you know, you can do all sorts of cool stuff. So what I think I'm likely to do is stamp with a silver ink around the edge, I think, to add a kind of filigreyness. And one set of stamps I have got, I don't think these are really appropriate, but I just bought them the other day by DYLUSIONS by DYAN REAVELY. These lovely leaves. Unfortunately, these ones are spotty. These ones are plain. I could stamp those in silver. See what the scale is like. I mean, I could stamp those in silver to make a border, couldn't I? And just sort of stop around the bottom. And just do it with a silver ink that's not going to show up too much. So it's just like a sort of almost like an interference colour that will barely show. So I might do that tomorrow. And that will be very, very solid silver. And I think I've got a silver ink, maybe a silver stamp that I could do that with. I mean, I could do it with acrylic paint if I wanted to, if I don't have a silver stamp. So that's a silver ink. Sorry, I'm pretty certain I do. Whether I've got enough ink to do something this size, I don't know. But you know, sorry, there's crap on my painting. I just wanted to blow it off before it got anywhere. I think I will do that. I think I'll bring in more of a frame. And, you know, the background actually has got a little bit of a pearlescent shimmer to it. It's very subtle, but I quite like it. When the tree's got more texture, I think the background's just going to look sludgy. So I think adding a stamp border is really going to help bring this piece together. And then I'll just make sure there's more silver in the tree. And the stem of the tree will have, once it's dry, I'll just add some silver flecks to it. I'm a bit worried about these areas here. If they still look really bare at that point, I think what I'll do is use a script stamp, and I have several, and I've got a grey archival ink, and I'll just put a pale grey, very muted, very fragmented little bits of text in there. So whilst it has this wonderful botanical border around the edge, we keep it slightly whimsical with a bit of text. And we'll see how that goes. So I'm going to let this dry overnight, and I'll see you tomorrow. Right, I'm back. It's the next day. This has dried down overnight, as acrylic always really should, before you do stuff with it. And I think it's also good practice sometimes to step away from the artwork and come back to it later. So we've got this green-grey metallic-ish background. We've got this very metallic raised tree. Lots of impasto gel hidden under the paint, so it's got a lovely, lovely, lovely rough texture. The shading down here I like. I want to have more colour though. I think it's gone very muddy in the middle. That's not a problem. I'm maintaining that grey and white outline for the lighting. That's fine. I like the way the metallic green and red look here. The trunk has got some impasto gel mixed in with it to give it a little bit of a raised texture and just a hint of pearlescence. So as you turn it in the light, I don't know if you can see it, but this trunk, as I turn it, has a white pearlescence on top of it. The soil, which is a mixture of brown and purple, burnt sienna and deep violet, has got a red interference medium in it, so there's just a hint of a red streak whizzing through that. And what I want to do to bring this together a little bit more is add on some stamping into the background. And I've had to think about what stamps to use, and I've spoken this morning to Lindsay the Frugal Crafter on direct message on Twitter so that I could get some ideas for how to use acrylic paint with stamps, because that's not something I do that often. I tend to use them with inks. So I'm going to try this with ink first, and we'll see how it goes. I've got two stamp sets that I'm actually interested in using today. One is this set by Hero Arts. It's about the only Hero Arts set I own. It's called Leafy Vines CG509, and I'll link to that in the video description along with all the other products I'm using. It's a really nice stamp, and it stamps so well. And then I've got this Stampers Anonymous from Tim Holtz's company, which has got some text here and some butterflies and some more text and some more butterflies. And I'd only ever be using the large stamp for this, just to add hints of text. And what I want to add first is that text, and then I wanted to use the Leafy Vines to go around the edge and add some scroll work. Now, I'm not going to be using a block because I don't want nice neat text. What I want is little bits, so I might stamp there to get that bit of number. I might stamp there to get a little bit of text. I'm not going to use the whole stamp. What am I going to stamp with? Well, that's a good question because I haven't got that far in my thinking yet. So I've got some pigment ink. I have various options. VERSACOLOR silver, which I only have as a cube. I don't buy full-size ink pads, to be honest, apart from things I know I use a lot, because I just don't use enough of them to justify how much space they take up, and some of them need a lot of space. So I'm just doing the usual, tamping it on there, and these ink pads actually last ages, even the little dinky ones like that, and you can get refills. And then I'm just going to put on some, what I'm doing is I'm trying to press firmly in the middle and let the other areas kind of not really make proper contact. And this won't give a very intense result. The idea of this is just to add a little bit of discreet shimmer, I suppose, to the background that I'm going to be happy with. I'm following the shape of the tree so we don't get anything over it, and it is really, really discreet text, just a sparkle of text here and there, not much at all. And I could probably go over this with Archival to add a little bit more. I'm just going to add a few more areas, and I'm turning the stamp upside down. Text is totally fine. Stamps really well on the clean canvas, actually, around the edges, which is quite nice. So I'm going to add a bit more depth now by stamping over the top. I'm not going to clean the stamp whatsoever. I'm not going to use those paint pens. I'm just putting them there for space. I'm sorry, you're very blurry. I forgot to refocus. There we go. I'm using Archival in Wendy VECCHI's line from the Archival range. So this is Watering Can, which is a pale grey. It's quite a nice grey. And I like Archival because it will stamp over paint pretty well. And I've picked up some silver on the pad, but that's not a problem. I can wipe that off later. It won't ruin the ink. Oh, that's really good now. I like that because I've got kind of a... Because I'm using the same areas kind of twice, what's happened is I've got this kind of effect of the silver ghost behind a grey stamp, and I actually pretty like that. I'm going to put some over here. I may not use those leafy vines, you know, because this is actually pretty cool. Let's get rid of the stamp pads. I want a bit of space. I work in a really confined space, which I know many of you know, but that does make it quite difficult sometimes. I'm not re-inking this until I really have to, because I like the idea of it kind of fading away. And also, if you use good pressure, you can usually get a couple of applications of different density. And actually I quite like that. I want a little bit more in the middle. I want to bring things together around the tree a little bit more. Sorry, you're out of focus again. I keep forgetting I need to refocus you. And because I'm using Archival, I'm going to need to use a stamp cleaner. I use the Stays On cleaner when I'm just wiping over that pad with a dried out old baby wipe to remove the silver that had got onto the top of it. To be honest, it's not an issue because anything I'm stamping ever in grey would look really cool in silver. I want to get some text right up against the tree so that it doesn't look too out of place. And a little bit around the top here. And I'm trying to go round it. I don't want anything on it. This is rapidly changing from an acrylic painting into a mixed media piece now, because I was going to stamp with acrylic. I don't think I need to do that anymore. I'm pretty happy with how this has turned out. And the nice thing when you use canvas board is you can just put your thumb behind and pinch the board, and that stamps really easily. I'll show you how I do that. So I just put the stamp on and then I pinch it, and that leaves a pretty good impression. Just want to get this along the bottom. I think I like that. There's a little bit of sparkle, not too much, and it's kind of cleared up a lot of that dull space. That's going to disappear into the background because I'm going to add more colour, and I may paint some streaks over the top. I could clean that now, I could clean that later, it won't actually matter. So I'm going to pop it to one side and we'll deal with it later. Now, back to the painting itself. How are we going to deal with this? I want to add more to it. I'm just going to roll up and tuck in my sleeves because I'm terribly untrusting of acrylic paint. It's got a habit of getting absolutely everywhere. And I just want to do some work on here. So I don't want to use too many ingredients. And at this stage, I'm not adding anything new, really. I want to use things I've already used. So my palette, everything is dried and rubberized on there, so I can worry about those later. They're all nice and dry, and they're not going to interfere. So, some silver hue. Archival dries so quickly on canvas that putting stuff straight on top, totally fine. I do want some titanium white because that's how I'm keeping my light areas. I won't add any more purple at this stage. I might add it right at the end if I feel I need it, but I want some light and I want some life, so I want some greens. So pistachio first, that lovely light green. You can see the difference between these soft and heavy body acrylics really easily. And now the more exciting colours. So the metallic green, which I love actually. I didn't think I was going to like using that. I really thought that was going to turn out really badly in this painting, but actually I've actually liked it. Something you may notice is that I'm really bad at knowing how much paint I'm going to need, and I have a tendency to not put out quite enough. The other thing I'm really bad about is actually being equipped for the day. and I've realised that I've left my sponges in the bathroom where I left them to dry last night, so I'll have to go and get those in a minute. Some tinting medium, pearlescent, just in case I need it. If you use it on its own, it's actually kind of pink, but if you mix it in with things, it adds a little bit of shimmer. So on its own, it's a pink pearlescence. Mix it in with colours and you get sparkles, and if you use more transparent colour, it actually kind of looks better. So there's a tip there, and I'll use some of that yellow green, that lovely heavy body thick acrylic, which stamps really well when you use it with a sponge, to apply it. I think I need a bit of blue as well, a darker blue, so the cerulean, there we go, a little tiny bit. Try not to use too much of any one colour at this stage. I want to keep some balance. I'm not putting Hooker's green back in. I think Hooker's green and the violet, you know, they're really in that background layer now. I don't need them. So I'm just going to whiz and grab my utensils and I will be back. Okay, I'm back and I'm just going to clean that stamp first. I use Stays On Cleaner. I'm just going to do it now because I'm stood up and that makes it easier to do. So I just take this stamp and rub some on. You don't need to cover the whole thing, you just need to put some on. I think it's an odourless mineral spirit by the smell of it, because they're never that odourless. And you take a paper towel and you just rub it. And you can get most of the ink off in one go. To be honest though, I find these inks dry on without distorting the image, and you don't need to be too precious about it. You know, they're there to be used, they don't need to look pristine. So there we go, cleaned and done. So that's that out of the way. I don't need to worry about cleaning my stamps. So I'm kneeling on my stool. I paint on a stool. I don't like a box stool that you can store things in, which is not good for one's back, but that's what I do. And I'm going to put out some orange, cad orange, and some cad yellow, and a little bit of pyrrole red, because I had them before and I only want to use flecks. They'll be put on with a brush at the end. I don't want large amounts of them. I literally want to just flick them on at the end to keep a bit of that life, because I like the effect of having a little bit of red mixed in with it. Now, I originally envisaged this that I'd do it all in fall colours, but kind of went out the window, didn't it? Often the way with mixed media and acrylic, what you start out with and what you end up with, totally different. So I'm going to use a dry sponge first of all, and I want to work on this upper area really to just kind of lighten it down. So I'm mixing some tinting medium, some pearlescent medium into some white paint, and I'm just going to tamp that over some of this area and to erase what I've already produced. I'm not erasing all, I'm not erasing everything, just some of it. I've forgotten to put the ceiling light on, so I'm working by one light, which feels very dark in here right now. So some Wedgwood green first of all, which is what we used in the background, so that won't look like much at all. Then some metallic green, and I'm going over some of that purple at the same time. Then some of that lovely light green, that yellow green I should say, which is a really nice little colour. It's not green gold, but it reminds me of green gold a little bit. Lovely, lovely colour. And back to some of that deep metallic. I like to have the metallic actually on the surface because it shows up better, but I like it to peek through things. I think it looks better that way. Bit of silver around the lit edge, the top edge. We have to have silver because we've used silver in the background stamping, so it's important that that shows. And now some of that Wedgwood blue, and I'm just sort of flicking that in. And a bit of cerulean with it, just to add some texture really. The cerulean is hard to stamp with because it's so thick, once you start to bring it into the stamp, it just gets drowned by the other colours because you have to sort of mix them a little bit. So now we've got a more realistic kind of tree shape, and what's nice is we've kept some of the background layer around it. I'm going to have to blend it in a bit more because the background originally had much more red in it, much more reddish brown in it, which I'm kind of erasing by repainting this because I didn't like it, and now I'm adding some yellow, and this yellow, this CAD yellow, is going to sit on the top. So once I add CAD yellow, I can't blend it in. Same with a little bit of CAD red that's going with it, CAD orange that's going with it around the top edge, and I'm not going to put that orange anywhere but that lit edge. I'm going to follow it up with a little bit of silver just for that lit edge. A little bit of the metallic green across the middle. I don't want peaks, so I'm just, if I've got peaks, I'm just knocking them off because I don't want those. And I'm picking up a little bit of that pyrrole red now with the yellow. It's with the yellow and the orange what are left on here. And I'm being very careful to just dab it on. Bit of Wedgwood blue again. And I want to sort of reinvigorate this shadow side here. So I'm going to mix a little bit of that metallic green and Wedgwood together to tamp around that shadow side and knock out those other colours. So we've got the kind of idea of flowers maybe within this tree. I don't know. I don't know what they are. I don't try and question what the painting actually is of. I don't care what it's actually of. It's a bloody tree. It looks nothing like a tree. It's got colours you don't find in nature. It's not trying to be a tree. It's an impression of a tree. And if you look at it and think, oh, that's leaves turning, it's fall, autumn, if you don't live in the US, fine. If you look at it and think, oh, it's a tree with multicoloured leaves, if you think of it as, oh, it's a tree with flowers, if you think of it as Christ Almighty, what on earth is that? That does not look like a tree. All of the above are perfectly acceptable. That is how Impressionist artwork works. It is the artist who creates the impression and leaves it to the audience to decide what they think. And I honestly don't care whether people like it or not, because it's my painting, not yours. So I've just mixed a little bit of DIOXAZINE violet, deep purple, into the white mixed with pearlescent tinting medium to make a very nice light pearlescent dark lavender. And I'm just putting that around that side. And I don't want that to look like a sort of false addition. So I'm adding... false addition is not really the right word, but I don't want it to look like it stands out too much. So just with the very tip of the sponge, I'm adding more of it around because it's in the soil already, so that's not a problem. And then I'm just placing some orange over the top. And you have to be careful at this point because obviously the purple will mud with any yellow or orange that it comes into contact with. So if you want light colours, you pick up a little bit of Wedgwood, a little bit of orange, and you just dot. I'm sorry, I got the low battery warning there, so the image may have kind of dulled away a little bit then, and I'm very sorry if that's what happened to you. I'll check that when I edit this later. Okay, I'm back, and I'm just going to clean that stamp first. I use Stays On Cleaner. I'm just going to do it now because I'm stood up, and that makes it easier to do. So I just take the stamp, I rub some on. You don't need to cover the whole thing, you just need to put some on. I think it's an odourless mineral spirit by the smell of it, because they're never that odourless. And you take a paper towel, and you just rub it. And you can get most of the ink off in one go. To be honest though, I find these inks dry on without distorting the image, and you don't need to be too precious about it. You know, they're there to be used, they don't need to look pristine. So there we go, cleaned and done. So that's that out the way. And I don't need to worry about cleaning my stamps. So I'm kneeling on my stool. I paint on a stool. I don't like a box stool that you can store things in, which is not good for one's back, but that's what I do. And I'm going to put out some orange, CAD orange, and some CAD yellow, and a little bit of pyrrole red, because I had them before and I only want to use flecks. They'll be put on with a brush at the end. I don't want large amounts of them. I literally want to just flick them on at the end to keep a bit of that life. Because I like the effect of having a little bit of red mixed in with it. Now, I originally envisaged this that I'd do it all in fall colours, but kind of went out the window, didn't it? Often the way with mixed media and acrylic, what you start out with and what you end up with, totally different. So I'm going to use a dry sponge first of all, and I want to work on this upper area really to just kind of lighten it down. So I'm mixing some tinting medium, some pearlescent medium into some white paint, and I'm just going to tamp that over some of this area and to erase what I've already produced. I'm not erasing all, I'm not erasing everything, just some of it. I've forgotten to put the ceiling light on, so I'm working by one light, which feels very dark in here right now. So some Wedgwood green first of all, which is what we used in the background, so that won't look like much at all. Then some metallic green, and I'm going over some of that purple at the same time. Then some of that lovely light green, that yellow green I should say, which is a really nice little colour. It's not green gold, but it reminds me of green gold a little bit. Lovely, lovely colour. And back to some of that deep metallic. I like to have the metallic actually on the surface because it shows up better, but I like it to peek through things. I think it looks better that way. Bit of silver around the lit edge, the top edge. We have to have silver because we've used silver in the background stamping, so it's important that that shows. And there's some of that Wedgwood blue, and I'm just sort of flicking that in. And a bit of cerulean with it, just to add some texture really. The cerulean is hard to stamp with because it's so thick. Once you start to bring it into the stamp, it just gets drowned by the other colours because you have to sort of mix them a little bit. So now we've got a more realistic kind of tree shape, and what's nice is we've kept some of the background layer around it. I'm going to have to blend it in a bit more because the background originally had much more red in it, much more reddish brown in it, which I'm kind of erasing by repainting this because I didn't like it. And now I'm adding some yellow, and this yellow, this CAD yellow, is going to sit on the top. So once I add CAD yellow, I can't blend it in. Same with a little bit of CAD red that's going with it, CAD orange that's going with it round the top edge. And I'm not going to put that orange anywhere but that lit edge. I'm going to follow it up with a little bit of silver just for that lit edge. A little bit of the metallic green across the middle. I don't want peaks, so if I've got peaks, I'm just knocking them off because I don't want those. And I'm picking up a little bit of that pyrrole red now with the yellow. It's with the yellow and the orange, what are left on here. And I'm being very careful to just dab it on. Bit of Wedgwood blue again. And I want to sort of reinvigorate this shadow side here. So I'm going to mix a little bit of that metallic green and Wedgwood together to tamp around that shadow side and knock out those other colours. So we've got the kind of idea of flowers maybe within this tree. I don't know. I don't know what they are. I don't try and question what the painting actually is of. I don't care what it's actually of. It's a bloody tree. It looks nothing like a tree. It's got colours you don't find in nature. It's not trying to be a tree. It's an impression of a tree. And if you look at it and think, oh, that's leaves turning, it's fall, autumn, if you don't live in the US, fine. If you look at it and think, oh, it's a tree with multicoloured leaves, if you think of it as, oh, it's a tree with flowers, if you think of it as Christ Almighty, what on earth is that? That does not look like a tree. All of the above are perfectly acceptable. That is how impressionist artwork works. It is the artist who creates the impression and leaves it to the audience to decide what they think. And I honestly don't care whether people like it or not, because it's my painting, not yours. So I've just mixed it more subtle. So signed it in the white DYAN REAVELY DYLUSIONS paint pen just there, very subtle. And actually I prefer that. I think that looks a lot better than what I had before. So to tidy up that area and just kind of get rid of that, I've got some both pearlescent tinting medium and some silver acrylic just to brush into that, and that's kind of got rid of it. It's the wonderful thing with acrylic and mixed media, you can just keep adding layers and get rid of your errors. So that's gone, can't see it was ever there. No one will ever know, as Jennifer Maguire says. And she's right, no one ever will. I'm just going to take out a little bit of that cad orange there and add a little bit of Wedgwood blue into it because it was just a bit too orange. So I've just moved some blue around and I've just smeared it into the background a bit there so that we have a bit of extra shadow around the tree. But I like it, pleased with it. It's not going to win any prizes, but I like it. I can probably sell it. This was actually not the one I'm making for my friend. This is actually the rehearsal to see if I like how it turned out. So if you want this painting, send me a direct message on here or email me at my email address, which you can find on YouTube, or send me a YouTube message with a serious offer and I'll see whether I'm willing to sell it to you. Otherwise, I'll take it to the person that usually sells my work in about 2 weeks after I put this video online, and they can sell it instead. But there you have it, a mixed media original tree. If you like this tutorial and you want to try doing this at home, what I ask is that you don't sell the work for personal profit. If you want to make this tree, you can give it to someone, you can sell it for charity, but you can't sell it as your own work. You need to credit me, and I'll put the credit details down below in the video description. Some people will allow you to do it. I sometimes allow it, but as I've sold several trees of this ilk already, I don't want to give up the copyright on this one. So this is my copyright, but I'm letting you use it under very, very, very specific circumstances. Look in the video description below for details of that. Thank you all very, very much, and goodbye.